Welcome to Frequently Speaking. This is your host, Max Wellness. Now, here on this podcast, we're going to start to break down words that we speak outwardly and how their vibrations create what we frequently see. Now, in today's episode, we're going to delve into leveraging lessons. Welcome to another episode of Frequently Speaking. Today, we are going to be talking about leveraging lessons. Now, with leveraging lessons, we come to understand that we have this whole concept now of traumas and triggers and wounds and all of these different ideologies. But I'm here to shift that for you, to give you a leverage point to really understand how we're actually perceiving these things and how to shift a perspective to bring a little bit more levity to this trauma wound generation by utilizing them for the power that we've been given in going through them. Or else what is it for? So a few things that I want to touch on today are shifting this concept and this idea of victimization and this mindset so that we start to leverage towards a captain state of being. Now, when I say captain state of being, it's really an understanding of this relationship that we have with our own ship, this vessel that we have. Now, as we're going through this world, and when we connect to these words like trauma, and we connect to these words like wound, we see this restriction, we see this resonance with this word that our body starts to feel and our central nervous system starts to be wound up. This brings us into a victimization mindset, starts to tell the mind of how to respond or even react to this trauma or this wound. This is going to be one of the main topics that we're going to be talking about today. Another aspect is reclaiming this power from trauma triggers and shifting that and seeing how there is a greater influence in looking at the flared imprints that are there. And when we look at these concepts of traumas and triggers, we see these concepts of how we are reacting to the past in the present moment. Now, this shift into flared imprints is similarly to a sun. When you see a solar flare, it's like this huge burst of energy that pops up. And though it may be unexpected, though it may be powerful, though it may be surprising, such as these triggers, this is something that is imprinted in our past. And it's also giving us an allowance and an opportunity to see how we can reclaim and harness that power to bring it back into us. Now, another aspect that we're going to be addressing here is moving forward from wounds that are greater than the mending mechanisms. So we're going to be looking at how we can take these wounds and these things that injured us or harmed us or hurt us and placed us in that victim mindset and really address the central nervous system as well as the cognitive behavior into a mending. We start to shift those coping mechanisms that we have, whether it be drugs, eating, sex, distraction, whatever it is, and we see those coping mechanisms that we have when we start to touch and poke at those wounds, and we start to really see how we can shift that into mending those mechanisms. We start placing the body into a mechanistic system that is actually there to mend rather than create more pain in that wound. Now, another aspect is going to be a little bit more broad, and it's really just the tone of what this episode is going to be about. And we're going to be exploring the waters of this natural state in our intentional direction. Now, when I say this, it's really a balance of the harmony that's within us, the scale that we're consistently on between our intention, meaning of the mind, and our natural state, meaning of the heart. How can we actually find that mind-heart coherence to really explore into the depths of our waters, meaning the emotions that are within, and address these particular flared imprints and start to create these mending mechanisms? Now, a few other things that we're going to really dive into are about how we can utilize our energetic momentum to regulate our central nervous system. Now, when we look at ourselves on a physiological level, we have our central nervous system, and these two languages that it speaks, we're either in a state of parasympathetic, or that rest and digest, or we're in a sympathetic state where we're in that fight or flight or freeze or flock or whatever it may be, that heightened state. And this is where we can start to see how that central nervous system is actually able to be regulated through this energetic momentum. We can take that harm of that sympathetic, that trigger, that flared imprint, and shift it energetically to start to regulate. So we're not working as hard, we're just shifting in energy to stabilize and regulate our physiological system. Now, the last thing I want to really close up this episode of Leveraging Lessons is really about finding our guiding compass through harmonized polarity. Now, in that, we look at these experiences that we have in our present day. We come up with a experience in life or a situation, or we see these flared imprints popping up. We address somebody that targets a wound that's within us, and we start to see it. And we sometimes get so critical that we look at it and say, oh, this is a lesson. Oh, this is a lesson. Oh, this is a lesson. And sometimes that can put us in this state where we're completely lost in this student aspect. And when we start to see that there is a polarity within both, we find this compass within it to say, there is a past point, but by me inviting that into the present, I see this as an opportunity, and I'm not necessarily lost in the lesson, but I'm beginning to project and set out these polarities of really understanding that there is a lesson and that there is also a love in that. Because in that love, we see that there is a power, that we're doing it consciously, we're shifting it consciously. These moments aren't just necessarily coming up as, lessons that we must be tested on, as if the universe or God or whoever it may be is consistently pushing you to test and succeed. And it's a consistent work or a job. We're going to see how we can find a compass to really tether down into our center and find the fun in leveraging these lessons of life. So without further ado, let's dive into it a little bit. And I want to start off by looking at an idea and a frame of a ship. If we see our vessel, our body, right, our mind, is being captained by this ship, and it's this soul. It's this soul that's the captain. And sometimes we find that, we have our different shipmates, and there's one person that cleans, and there's one person that steers, and there's one person that checks the coordination, and all these different things. And finding that harmony within our shipmates, we can really start to paint this picture of how we're actually sailing on these waters of life. Now, when you're in a relationship, there's a foundation of how you relate to things. In this relation, you begin to bring together piece by piece a vessel that has a desired destination. You start to see how, you build the ship, and, it has a mast, and it has the bow, and all of these pieces that bring the ship together. Now, along the way, we start to find moments of coming together that make the journey all the worthwhile. Laying in the sun, receiving a smile, having a dinner in the moonlight. The relation becomes deeper with the emotional ties that stitch the vessel, that begins to form a destination that we allow time to frame together like an old film roll. We start to see that from when we are birthed into this world, we have this vessel that has been bestowed upon us. And we start to go through life, and, continuously people, our parents, our society, our friends start to add to that ship. And then we start to create these relations. And by relations, I mean these experiences that we're having, whether they be judged as good or bad, they start to make up how your ship is actually forged and how it's created to start sailing. Now, when we start to come to this realization of all the warmth within a relationship, we start to see the rocking of the boat that gives us these moments of seasickness out of the series of smooth sailing scenes. Now, by that, I mean, as we're going through life, we start to realize that, yeah, some of these situations start to cause traumas that we start to see. And those are those huge flared imprints that we see, those huge bursts of energy that get stored in our central nervous system as like that seasickness. It makes you sick to your stomach, whether it be abuse in your life, whether it be somebody hurting you, somebody leaving you, something you've done to yourself, whatever it may be. Those are those moments of seasickness where your central nervous system stores and it says, okay, this is something that is a part of my ship. It can't necessarily move this way. It can't move that way. So we start to create those flared imprints and your ship starts to learn. Now, it's in these moments where we realize the difference between relating and being a part of this crew. We start to separate ourselves. We start to see how the captain has steered one way and the person that is moving the mast or sitting at the bow or the one that's up at the top of the mast and has the compass and sees which direction, they all start to create this relationship of communicating. Now, when one starts blaming the other for that seasickness or that turn or that splash up, this is where we start to see how we are relating to those different aspects and those different crew members of our ship. We come to learn that all the points of relation are points of entry, as well as that those things aren't always leveraged our way. So when the captain is telling, the shipmate to steer course left and the mast swings to the left, that's going to make it go to the right. So having this clear communication of really understanding how to settle into our body, we're having these experiences out in our own reality. The things that we may be governing our ship and we may be wanting to go in a certain direction that is intentional for us, sometimes the waters don't move that way and life pushes us in a different direction, or some other ship, crashes into ours, or these are the things of how our central nervous system is really targeted in a way. And sometimes we fall into that victim mindset. Now, when we fall into that victim mindset, we start to create separation between those crewmates. And that communication gets harder and harder to really steer the ship into the direction that we would like to go. Now, I see all of these points as learning aspects, but these points of learning come as what we call lessons. Now, from my perspective, I see them as blessings. Now, blessing is also a lesson. We can look at it in either way, but this is also a shifting of that perspective of when those things get stored in our body, how do we shift that mindset from, I'm learning this lesson, and being so strict and so disciplined in that and so critical of that communication that we start to leverage it into how we're learning through this love of life. Now, the ways in which we approach, receive, and rise out of those lessons is how we have learned to record those experiences and adhere to those imprints. If we get that rocking of the boat and we get that seasickness, how do we store that? How does the body store that? How does the central nervous system store that? How does the mind store that? Because that is the learning aspect. Now, when we look at neuroscience and we look at how the brain learns and records information and how children actually store information, is through play, it's through fun, it's through joy. When the mind or the body is in a state of reactivity or that sympathetic state, it does not receive any knowledge. It does not receive any wisdom. So when you're, yelling at a child or when you're being yelled at as a child, you're recording that experience and that flared imprint in that way. So you're not necessarily recording what is actually happening or the lesson. You're just storing it in that sense of, this is seasickness. I'm feeling the emotion. I'm feeling the energy that's present here. But to be able to allow that solar imprint to just burst out and really be released, then we're actually learning and we're leaning into that experience so that we don't adhere to that imprint and we're not, ashamed by it, or felt guilty by it, or afraid of it. We either leverage these lessons into learned traits, or we leverage them right into the sea, jumping ship based on this unsteady rocking or the fear of being on a sinking ship once again. So in those states that cause us to create victimization mindsets, when that flared imprint happens, whether if it's a parent yelling at you, friends alienating you in school, or you harming yourself, or whatever it may be, those are those moments in time, those experiences that our central nervous system sees and records. And rather than saying, okay, this is a lesson here and there's a learned trait and I'm having fun with this and I can embrace it, most of the time we're taught as children to not have that. So as an adult now, we start to keep those flared imprints expressing outward. And that is what causes us to keep consistently learning these lessons. They're just flared imprints being emitted from your central nervous system to release that energy and to create an opportunity in the present moment right now, which is what we call triggers. And this is the opportunity where we can see that lesson, but also receive it as a blessing. Now, using the momentum of our learned lessons of leveraging, some people disallow themselves the chance to ask, am I stepping into this mechanism based in fear or because of the intent to bring balance to the ship? This is really looking at those allowances and those permissions that we might not necessarily have been granted long ago within our past and bringing that into our presence. This is where we can offer that permission, that allowance to shift and reclaim that power from that trauma or that trigger and shift it and see it for the flared imprint that it is, to say, okay, this is a point where I can leverage that movement of the sea, that push from the sea and that big wave to bring balance to my ship, to bring balance to my central nervous system, to be one with that push, to be one with that pull, and to really settle in to our center. But that's just it though. It may be neither of the individuals. It could very well be the waters in which they are sailing, or the ways in which they relate, the ways in which we talk to the captain, the ways in which we talk to the crewmates, the way in which we talk to the person steering with the mast or the rudder. Then there is this realization that we are reacting or responding from the comfort of how we learn our trauma and wounds. So we're either storing them in our body as trauma, or we're storing them as wounds. We can see this as, oh, this hurt me. Oh, we can see this as being traumatic. That is that victimized mindset that we start to carry on into our present state. So coming back into the present state now, this is something that we can learn how to shift, and we're going to work through of how we can move from that concept of wounds into mending mechanisms, because that wounded mindset and that victimized mindset shifts us into coping mechanisms. We need to cope, and that's how we learn. We've learned that through comfort, we start to cope. Now, feeling the salt splash up on them, they start to act out this victim role of past experiences to bring them into the present moment. As that big wave comes and hits their ship once again, and that salt splashes up and it gets into their eyes, and then they're like all stressed out, and you're like, oh my God, it burns. That's the aspect of really understanding that when we're sailing on this ship, it comes with sailing. It comes with acceptance. Now, this might sound like a plot to another Johnny Depp movie, but when you're the one in the boat, blaming your wounds, traumas, and limiting labels for your current behavior, we can only hope for an epic soundtrack to introduce the smoky-eyed pirate to help you escape. But this is no movie, and we are done condoning escapism. This is a common scene we play out in relationships in this modern day. When we're looking at our present state of day, We're looking for that savior because we're placed in that victim mindset. We're looking for that hero to come about and have some kooky, weird thing that pops up and says, hey, this is what we're going to do. And yes, the plan may seem like it's all crazy and all these things, but where do we actually take that consciousness to really take responsibility of the life, to shift that reclamation of our power into the mechanisms that begin mending? Now let's get into dissolving the identity through identifying. Identifying is a huge aspect that we see now. And it's really important about how we identify. And if we don't learn how we've been taught to identify things such as trauma or wounds, then we're not really going to see them for what they really are or the power that's latent within them. So first off, let's dissolve some of this negative tone connotations from the terms like trauma and wounds. I like to refer to trauma as flared imprints, as I said. I like this term because much like this solar flare, these instances in our lives that took place were a natural occurrence of a volatile body of energy that was affected in a weakened point in space and time. At some point when you were in space and in time as a child, as a young adult, or whatever, somewhere in your point in your past, there was this huge occurrence of volatile energy that was in your body that shook you to a core. This imprinted on your central nervous system, and imprinted meaning that it was recorded in your central nervous system as this big body of energy, whether you closed in on yourself or you rejected it or you held it as something, this is hurt or this is pain or betrayal. However that labeling is, that is how your body identified this imprint. Now, this ultimately affected us in a way that, however deep, on whatever level, that was recorded by this intelligent being. This intelligence, being the life-preserving nature that it is, also found a way to survive by tethering to this imprint down, and it pushed it, whether, you can go into the energetic system, the chakras, whatever it may be, it pushed it to somewhere into your body to compartmentalize it into this time and mind as a wound or this mending mechanism. So as that imprint is there, it started to be wound up in the central nervous system. And this is where we see like blockages of energy, whether that's in your solar plexus, whether that's in your throat chakra, your heart chakra, wherever it may be. This is where that winding comes up, and it starts to be wound so tight, which is so interesting that the word wound is just exactly the same as wound. Now, in that, your body and this intelligent sentient being that's in you is saying, okay, well, you're okay, you're safe, we need to also survive. And that survival state is that sympathetic system. So your central nervous system is really just crunching up and winding this experience and bounding it to time and space within your mind. And that tightness creates a communication up to the captain or the mind that is, navigating this ship and saying, oh, well, there's tightness here. So once we feel that wave into the bow of the ship, we need to react this way. We need to respond this way, or we need to cope. And that is the part where we can shift into unwinding it to start mending it, into getting that mechanistic system so that when it happens again, this is how we respond. Now, when the flared imprint occurs, we in our identity say, this happened to me, because most likely we were too young to identify with anything else, as well as discern that this experience was happening for us. So we see that lesson as, oh, this happened to my ship. We're not looking at the opportunity or the blessing of that shift, because we have yet to have that discernment to identify that this thing is an opportunity to leverage, to harness, to pull in that energy and actually leverage it towards a balanced harmony. Now, the identity in reaction to the flare-up creates preventative and protective measures and plugs up the hole, wound, to make sure this never happens again. hence our strong disregard for trusting others with our safety. The thing about this is that the pain stays inside because of that mechanism that has been put into place. Whether it's pain, whether it's distrust, rejection, guilt, blame, any of these things, those are those dense anchors of emotions that get settled and really imprinted and mechanized as reactions, or what we might call responses, but they're really not responses. They're just reactions because it's wound so tight that it won't let go. So that is that mechanism that is in place. So then we start to see, okay, I'm going to, keep trusting people. I'm going to keep pleasing people, or I'm going to stuff my face with food because I'm feeling this emotion. This is that reactive coping mechanism where we learn to cope because of these things make us feel comfortable once we have that identification with whatever emotion is happening to us. Now, never allowing the light to enter with this next created opportunity. So once that wave hits again, we disallow that opportunity, we disallow that blessing to enter into our central nervous system. So we still begin to sail on with water still in our ship. Now, really, what's happening? A person that adheres to their flared imprints can begin to safeguard them, just as they had to safeguard the experience recording all this time. The reason is that something here in the present is the catalyst for familiarity to the body, since there is such a deep level or relation, and most likely, safety. We see this comfortability, we see this familiarity within the body, and that is what it starts to harmonize towards, because that's all it wants. So in seeing that, it starts to create this reason because it wants to shift, but that safeguard is still in that survival aspect. You're still in that sympathetic state and still reacting or responding from that state, trying to create a level of safety. But that safety is really a feeling. It's a deeper set feeling that is inside of you. Now, we wouldn't recreate the familiar emotional effect if we weren't vulnerable and open to the rocking relation. You're not sabotaging yourself in this. When we're seeing this wave happen, we're identifying with the wave. Oh, okay, this wave is pouring into the ship. Oh, it's hurting me. Oh, it's doing this. But to be vulnerable is to open up another port or another channel for that water to actually exit the ship, so that you're not perceived to be sinking. So you're not perceived to be hurting or, being destroyed or being distrusted or being lied to. This is an opportunity for you to continue to be something else, to mend this wound up state that's within you. Now, on the ship, this may look like a person being activated by a catalyst, or what we call now triggered, and then being thrown so far into that recording that they lose the present moment to be able to see the safety in the new experience. So we miss that deeper set feeling of what safety actually truly brings, to remember that there is safety within that central nervous system. So that recording starts to bring in that wound up reaction or that reactive state. So when that central nervous system is shifted, or when it's seeking that safety and it's moving from that sympathetic state, the mind is taken out of that present moment. The captain loses focus. And this starts to disallow them the opportunity to rewrite that flared imprint. When that wave hits, you miss that opportunity to lean in with it and leverage that energy and harness it and shift back into that center. In the realization of this, they later use this position of being in that narrative as leverage to avoid the missed opportunity at a lesson. And by this, I mean when we're in that narrative of the victim mindset, this is just allowing you to know that your central nervous system is still in that survival state. It's still in that sympathetic state. And what we actually do is when that wave hits, that is the lesson. But rather than going with it and leaning into it and harnessing it, we start to miss that opportunity to lean in, and we lean against it because it's so rigid and so wound up that we see it as a wound. Now, this is natural and common to see someone stuck in this cycle, but the healthy question is to ask, why are they choosing to stay there? It's because that split second of rocking, as the lesson is being presented and stirred, they need a grounding factor in their partner to prevent that salt from stinging and echoing into the present moment, to pull them back into that mechanism. Now, this can look like a partner, this can look like, an experience at work, wherever it may be, wherever this triggering comes up. Because in that communication to those other shipmates, this is where that momentum starts to pull them into that mechanism of finding comfort, of finding safety. And this is that coping. But where do we get the grounding? When we get the grounding, we see it in eating, going to have sex, excessive sex, or drugs, or porn, or whatever it may be, whatever that vice is. That helps the salt and the stinging and the echoing that shifts you out of the present, and it gives you a coping mechanism to come back into the body. When we really necessarily need to find this aspect where we create a mending mechanism. Now, this is very much like a boat at sea in a huge storm. You cut all the engines, you let go of the wheel, and brace for the surrender to the mercy of the nature of the lesson. This can look many ways for different people, and that is where the discernment of partnership comes in. So, in a realistic point of view, when you are a captain of a ship and you're out at sea and there's a huge storm, you don't go into the storm and try to ride the waves and try to control it, because you're just going against the nature. Now, this is really looking at our natural state of trying to control the whole life, trying to control all the emotions. And it's less about that and really letting go. And, they say Jesus, take the wheel. It's really letting go of the engines, turning off all the power, letting go of the steering wheel, and allowing those waves to move you, to loosen those wounds and just go with the flow, for lack of a better term. Now, when you no longer just relate to a person over the beautiful moonlit, sandy nights, sun-kissed, half-naked, chai mornings, talks and interlaced limbs beneath a comforter, when you are part of them in this beginning of partnership, that is when you start to see the relativity, the relation that is happening on your own ship. When you connect to those parts and see how those experiences affect your body, you see how that leveraging of all of those experiences that have come up into your life have been those blessings, have been those sun-kissed, half-naked chai morning talks, and those interlaced limbs, with a partner, or those beautiful experiences that pop up when you're a child and you were laughing and playing, and maybe you fell and broke your arm out of a tree, but how beautiful was that tree? How exhilarating was it to feel, to climb that whole tree? That's where we see the blessings in these lessons. Now, landing the lessons. Keeping the idea, speech, and narrative alive of traumas and wounds will disallow us from ever being able to see the lesson and gather the strength to leverage it the next time we see it. We don't really allow ourselves when we have that stuck narrative within our mind. So this is why it's important to shift our words, shift the ways that we speak, and shift the ways that we identify with these experiences that have happened to us. Now, this is where we see the balance between that nature and the intended direction. So just like we said with the ship in the middle of the sea, and you have this storm, right? The storm is pure nature. The storm is traffic. The storm is having a shitty schedule. The storm is your boss having a bad day. The storm is your kid throwing a tantrum. It's all of these things that are natural that you cannot control. And when we try to create an intended direction and just stressing our mind, that is that wound up captain that is experiencing this natural thing that is happening maybe in the solar plexus or the sacral chakra, that has that wound up aspect or that wound that is there. And if we have not yet leaned in to that mending mechanism to address it and cut off all the engines and let go of the steering wheel and release the control from that intended direction, then we're set to go against that. And we can't really leverage or harness the strength and that opportunity of that situation. Now, navigating the emotional waters that life can be, we come to learn the lessons through these flared imprints for just that. This always reminds me of that beautiful quote by Rumi: "The wound is where the light enters you." In this, I see the opportunity not to just observe and point out these flared imprints and see their mechanisms, but to leverage their nature through acceptance, to welcome this light in. That is the part where we allow these lessons to really land. It is us that can discerningly and almost preemptively and intuitively see these opportunities come up and also shift our perception, the way that we see how this experience has been imprinted on us, to see to a different perception of how we relate to the traumas, how we relate to the wounds, and can we actually open it up and face whatever may be there, whether it may be fear, whether it may be guilt or pain. It's opening that wound ourselves. Now, I know this to be true. Lesson learning and dissolving of these limiting labels and the nauseating narratives that will provide healthy journeys towards healed destinations, worthy of us screaming, "Land home," from our mast. Because in this dissolving, in this perception shifting, we change the lens and we also change our perspective. We allow our perspective, where we are spectating from on that ship, to start to become harmonized, because we're seeing the waves differently. We're communicating to those shipmates differently. And in that sense, we are creating a more harmonized communication through our body. And through our body, this is what I mean by those shipmates, those different energetic areas. And we start to find that compass. And that compass comes through seeing the polarity of the mind, seeing the polarity of the heart, seeing the polarity of all the different energetic channels that we have within our body that may be wound up or may have these tied up, tight mass that are really feeling reactive, and that person that's at the front of the ship really afraid of that next wave that's coming, but it feels that safety, it feels the confidence from that captain. So that when you experience another wave coming against your ship and bursting up towards the side, and all the water comes over and it starts to feel like you're being capsized, there is no reactive state. The fear is present, the emotion pops up, but you see it as the flared imprint. And you know and trust that you have those mending mechanisms. And without capsizing into your own self, limiting doubts of leveraging the past against the present, and ultimately our promising future, we begin to step foot on our holy land together, healthy, healed, and heading into abundant union with an open heart. If you like this episode and would like to explore more perspectives like this with me, as we get a bit more intimate and intricate look into our internal vibrations, be sure to tune in to next week's episode and subscribe for more. Until then, keep frequently speaking what you frequently see.